Well, welcome everyone. I think we have a little bit of an expanded group today, possibly, I'm not sure. I'm Leslie Blicker from Minnesota State. I work along with Kim Lynch, and we're in the Educational Innovations Division and on the coordinating committee. And in working with the coordinating committee, we decided that we wanted to really have a deeper dive set of meetings we did in the fall as well as the spring. So we have 2 consecutive meetings right now that will be looking at managing the digital transition from high school to from K-12 to higher ed. And so let me just turn to the agenda for a minute. We're starting today with it, and then we have a meeting April 11th. So you are all equally invited. I imagine there will be a WebEx login link at some point, so we'll have to send that later. But the purpose of the April 11th meeting is to continue the conversation from today so we can identify opportunities for improvements, either of offering services or other supports to provide a better transition. We know that there are a lot of gaps. I don't know how much we can work on, but we haven't really had that conversation between K-12 and higher ed. We have lots of studies, we've read a lot, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute for the context. So you're welcome to come to the second meeting, and thank you for joining us today. We have a robust set of what we're calling panelists who work in the field. We've presented them with a set of 4 questions and asked them to tell us which questions we think they can address, and I'll get to that in a minute. But just to give us an idea about who's here, would you take a second in the chat window, tell us if you're, K-12 or higher ed, and then which system you're from, and that'll just give us a sense, about this. I'm not asking for anything more. So K-12, higher ed, and are you with Minnesota State or the U of L? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Is my chat not working any? Oh, here we go. Never mind. Great. Looks like we have a really nice mix, and I sent out to many listservs. So for those of you from Minnesota State, just personally, I want to thank you. I know this would probably be the first time you might be attending one of these meetings. So, and thank you to everyone else who's here. Great. Well, ground rules. I hate to call them. Just let me tell you how the meeting will work. I was planning to take up to 10 minutes for this intro part. I might only take 7. We'll see. But we have a packed agenda, and we have 5 panelists. I'm just going to show you them briefly here, the 5 panelists that we asked to look over these 4 questions. And you can see that we've asked them, and we said, could you please pick 1 or 2 questions you could address? And so I am going to go through the questions as your facilitator one at a time, and then call on the panelists who are prepared to talk about this. We are going to have about 50 minutes for the rest of the session, but I want to keep all of the questions for the last 10 minutes. That will give us 40 minutes for 4 questions, so roughly 10 minutes per question, and if you'll allow me, I will gently nudge us along. So it doesn't matter if there's 1 person talking or 2 people talking, we'll cap it at 10. If we can pick up some time here or there, great. I'll make sure organically we keep it moving along. So those are sort of the ground rules for today. If you have questions, put them into the chat exactly as we go along. State which question number, 1, 2, 3, or 4. State maybe who's speaking when you have that question, and then we'll grab those questions at the very end. We're not going to have open mic today. I think we're just going to facilitate it via chat. So there you have it. Okay? For those of you who are new or coming because the topic sounded interesting, I doubt that this would be true, but if you have any questions about what, I'm going to type it in, about what the various options are for high school students to be obtaining college credit, the 2 main options, of course, are PSEO, post-secondary enrollment options, and concurrent enrollment options. And I posted this Google, oh, thank you. Okay, Jeff, is that the same link? I think so. Okay, so it's an open access Google document. You can access and look at that, and it's a good matrix. It talks about kind of how they both work, how they're same, and how that, you know, sort of a compare and contrast document. Okay, said as, you know, I adjunct as a faculty in my part-time, so, you know, I think about that a lot. Alrighty. So what I want to move on to before we introduce the panelists is a brief context for today. And as, again, the coordinating group thinks about what kinds of conversations do we want to have for these deep dive sessions, it was approximately last spring, I think, or even summer, maybe it was June, I can't remember, when we talked about what kinds of topics, and the topic of what about transitioning from high school to college, and do our systems really talk about these topics together? Of course, everything is filtered through the lens of teaching either online or blended, but it's at the intersection of where technology meets education. So, you know, here's what we've learned from studies, right? If you go online and Google, we've learned many over the past decade or longer. Here are just some bullet points that I wanted to address to introduce this topic. That over the past decade or longer, that technology proficiency, you know, can be stratified by gender, race, and ethnicity. Studies suggest that technological demands will widen the equity dimensions of the college preparation gap by aggravating the academic challenges that many students face already. And because the work of higher education is, of course, involving more and more technological presence, we hope to dig a little deeper to understand just how this disparity in student readiness for the digital demands of college life impact equitable access and outcomes. Now, I don't know that all the panelists today were prepared to talk about the disparity and, you know, equity and access, those kinds of things, inclusion and equity, but we know that everything is peppered through that by our student populations. And we do have great people on board with us today, some panelists, I think, who can start tackling some of these questions. We have, and this is what I obtained, so I don't know some of you, I know some, but we have Lindsay Matz Benson, an instructional designer with the University of Minnesota Libraries on hand. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Jennifer. She's a Ramp Up to Readiness Director at the University of Minnesota College Readiness Consortium. Carla Johansson with Distance Minnesota. She's part of the Minnesota State System, at least Distance Minnesota is. Kayla Westra is the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness and does so many more things as well at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. And Mary Messicomer, Technology Integration Development and Outreach Facilitator at Sourcewell Tech. So without further ado, I am going to start reading the questions. You know, I realized I forgot to enable my video, but as I was talking, and here we are, so you can see me. I will probably turn it off as other people talk. For presenters, if you're willing to turn your video on, feel free, your camera, I mean your webcam, so we can see you, but don't feel absolutely obligated to do it. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So the first question is, what do we know about how well prepared high school students are who join the online and digital learning environments at our post-secondary institutions? So this is a conversation. We asked people to answer these questions, by the way, only about 2 weeks ago, so we're not looking for real prepared, high-polished, high-gloss PowerPoint slides. We're just looking for their discussion on this. So I'm going to ask Lindsay to start, and again, about 10 minutes per question, and I'll keep us moving on. So Lindsay and Kayla, you've got 10 minutes to split.
Okay. All right. I'm just starting my video. Hi, everybody. Lindsay is here. I'm hoping you can see me. I turned my camera on and everything. So, and there's a cat meowing outside my door. So apologies if you hear a cat yelling. So I am an instructional designer for the University of Minnesota Libraries, and one of the primary things that I do is I assist in teaching our Intro to Library Research course, which is something most first-year students take if they haven't tested out of their writing requirement. So it's something we do part of the Intro to Writing course that most students take at the university. And what I can see, and this is both taught online through a tutorial, and it's taught through an in-person course where people are having to operate library databases and do some very basic level research on library stuff, I guess, for their research topic. And the one thing that I notice is there is this assumption that students know how to manage all of this stuff, and that they think that they know where all of their information comes from on the web. And so that because it's on the internet, there's not necessarily a full discerning, students don't necessarily discern all of the things that they need to know on the web, and they pull things and manipulate things. And there's I've noticed a shift as I've been in higher ed of students who were much more trusting of things on the web, and then the recent shift of being less trusting of things on the web. And so if they want to manipulate something, or if they want to do something with that information, there's a very big divide in the facility of how they actually can do this. So, and I don't know where they learn that, and I don't know where they have learned this facility, if students are looking it up, if there's an assumption that they're going to learn it somewhere, if it's something they learn in high school, where I think we have this assumption as educators sometimes is that they might, especially higher ed educators, that they probably learned it in high school, so they're obviously going to know how to operate within this environment when they come to a higher ed institution. And that's not necessarily true. And I think that's kind of a subject of privilege on our part, if we can make the assumption that people are like us and that they learn the way we learn. And so we're going to teach them the way that we best learn. And so we're having these expectations and assumptions of our students. That one thing that I've noticed as well is the familiarity with lots of different devices, and how students are much more prepared to do things cross-device than I think we are as educators, or at least the educators I work with. So students who can go to doing their library research on their phone to having to do it on a laptop and in a bigger environment. One thing that we're noticing is students are way better prepared to kind of just go with the flow when it comes to learning technology, especially when they're in our classrooms. And yeah, so it's that whole idea of, I see a very big divide in the privilege of the facility of how we can actually operate in the technologies, and then the assumptions of what a good technology is in our learning environment.
Okay, well, thank you. We realize we have a snappiness to this, I'm using Kim Lynch's word, to the momentum of this meeting. We're going to keep it, it's almost like an interview question, like answer, and we'll keep it moving on. So thank you very much. We have a question, we'll address all the questions at the end, and then I'd like to turn it over to Kayla Westra now.
Okay, so I'll build off what Lindsay mentioned. So I'm at a community and technical college, and we have 5 campuses out in rural Minnesota. So when you talk about privilege and access and equity, that's definitely something that factors in. The students of privilege come fairly well prepared in their technology skills because they just have more access at home. The campus that I'm at is in Worthington, Minnesota. What most people don't understand about Worthington, a town of about 14,000, is that the high school is 68% diverse and the elementary is 75% diverse. And so we have a really broad range of abilities coming in, both in language and technology skills. So that presents a whole different set of challenges. But equity and access is really important. You can have a one-to-one initiative, for example, in K-12, but if you have students at home that don't have access, it doesn't really do them a ton of good to take that iPad home if they need internet access. So our school district's been very aware of that and working within that and self-contained pieces, and then also the community has been behind it. There's a lot of open access now in the community. So far as if you've ever been out into rural Minnesota and understand the whole concept of townships, there are wireless router points out in the middle of townships, kind of in the middle of nowhere, where people can go and just drive in and use that access, so that's been kind of neat. We've been doing an Intro to Online Learning class here at Minnesota West since 2004. It is free. It is available to students at any point in their career here. We encourage them to take that in their first semester. Because of where we are and as rural as we are, our students almost all have to or do use Desire to Learn as part of their learning process. So the sooner that we can get them into that class and let them play around with the tools and, do something in the assignments drop box and take a quiz, just removes that fear. We have a lot of students who, if they aren't dropped in right away, they will contact us and they want in. We've had about 15,000 people go through this optional class since 2004. So we know that it's providing a way for people to get in and play around that's very low stakes, and that's been a good thing. We're also trying to integrate more with our high schools. I see we're offering a college prep class, for example, at the Worthington High School for students in the academic middle, and it is a digital literacy class along with our freshman seminar class, and we call it college prep. We're trying to remove some of the stigma of those students in the academic middle who may be fearful of taking a class, that they aren't quite sure that they can. Maybe it's a first-generation student. We've seen a lot of success with that over the last couple of years in preparing those students then to come in and be successful here at Minnesota West and be prepared in that digital learning environment. So those probably the main things that kind of go along with what Lindsay had mentioned.
Okay, thanks so much, Kayla.
Oh, I have one more point, Lindsay, or
yeah.
Leslie, one more point. We do have some schools and in the K-12 sector that really lock down everything. The students that come out of those schools where email won't even travel outside of their school, or all of their sites are really locked down, those students have much more difficulty coming in and using the tools just because they haven't had access before. So that's pretty important.
Okay. Great, thanks. So question number 2 we'll move on to. And again, if you've joined us late, just type your question into the chat and we'll field them at the end. What type of anecdotal or formal data do we have about the success of high school students who have taken online courses through one of the methodologies in terms of their college readiness and eventual success in their college program? Now, this might be a strong leap to say those who have taken online courses are completely ready, but we just want to hear what your experience is. The panelists, I'll start again with Kayla since she just stopped, and then we'll move on to Carla Johansson. Go ahead, Kayla.
I'm sure there is formal data. I don't have it in front of me, but anecdotally, we do see that students that take an online class in high school, they come in much better prepared, for example, to come in and be successful even in our on-campus environment. And so we do see a correlation there that they're kind of ready for the college work. So that seems to follow, that if they take an online class in high school, if they use a system such as D2L or Schoology or in the high school, they are much more prepared in their college environment to be successful and be able to complete and use those tools.
Great, thanks.
I would say a direct correlation.
Okay. And Carla, are you prepared to give an answer?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I am part of a 3-college consortium that offers online college and high school courses to students who, our program is set up so the online courses are delivered to the high school and a proctor is working with these students and the technology is all there for them, for our students. The 10th graders that take any career and technical courses, we require them to take an online orientation course, which is set in the D2L shell, and we want to make sure that they are prepared for this online course. And then any 11th or 12th graders that are coming in, we can see in ISRS if they've taken any other online courses, and if they have, we don't require them to take the orientation course, but if they have not, then we ask them to take that online orientation course to make sure that they're familiar with D2L, because that's how all of our courses are taught. The advantage I believe that we have is that the proctors in the classroom are there to assist the students, to work with them, to give them a set time to work on the courses every day. We do collect all the data every semester on how students are doing, how well they're performing, what kind of grades they are obtaining. We collect that. We've been collecting that for almost 13 years now. We want to make sure that they are successful. If they are not meeting satisfactory academic progress, we work with them and their proctors. We let them know the implications of taking these high school courses, what it could have when they do go to college. So we do have a lot of data that we've collected over the years, and we feel like because of the program we have in place, we offer 50 to 60 courses each semester between the 3 colleges that we work with. They share seats among all 3 colleges. We are in the opposite end of the state of Minnesota West, so we're working with high schools in the Northwest region where these smaller high schools are not able to offer these college courses, or logistically the high school students are not close enough to a campus where they can attend a college course, so all of ours are PSEO through online delivery. And again, we have a lot of data that we've collected over the years from these students, and our success rate has really been pretty impressive, and we're up to about 1,000 seats each semester that we have students in for online college in the high school.
Okay. Of course, I want to ask a question right away. Just before you stop, we are going to take questions at the end, but does the data talk about success? Did I miss your addressing that, like what you know about the success of the students? Do you have anything more?
Yes, we have academic grades that we accumulate, so we know how many achieved, 4.0, a 3.0, all of that, how many completed the course, how many withdrew from the course, how many didn't pass, and our fail rates are very, very small. Of course, as we're growing, those rates are higher, but we really, especially in the orientation piece, we want to make sure that these students realize the impact that these college courses can have for these students once they do go on to college after high school graduation. So again, if they start as a sophomore and in their junior year, if they're not completing those courses or successfully completing those courses, we actually work with the proctors and set them up on an academic success plan and make sure that they realize, how this is going to impact their student or their grades when they attend college. And again, because we have that connection with the high school and the proctor, we're working very closely with them as well. And we have some high schools that are sending, that are filling up some of our courses because they can't offer them in their high school. And so we've developed those relationships over the years and created that knowledge so that they know if their students are struggling, and we have the resource or the resources that if they need additional assistance, we also help them with that as well, the tutoring and other resources that might be available to students.
Okay. Thanks so much. And Kim Lynch, I'm not sure if you meant to type something in, but perhaps you can ICKLL with something, so. Okay, well, right, okay. Glad there was no I in there, I'm just saying. Okay, we're going to move on to question 3. Again, I'm collecting all the questions, so thank you for submitting your questions. Question 3, and we've got, in this order, Jennifer, Mary, and Carla. We've picked up a few minutes, so you'll be splitting roughly about 13, 14 minutes, so if you can keep your comments to about 4 or 5 minutes each, that would be great. Are there particular high school practices, and we say, for example, digital literacy, technology access, actually Carla just talked about support systems between the two systems, that was a great best practice, Carla, thank you. Anyway, are there particular practices you know that show promise or lead to success in terms of college readiness and eventual success in the college program? Conversely, what barriers do you perceive as impeding success? So Jennifer, and again, for those of you who may have joined late, if you're willing to enable your video camera, great. If not, no worries. So Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm hoping that you can see me. I'm signed in as my colleague Julie Schweitzer, but this is me on the video. Are you able to hear me?
We can see and hear you, so thank you.
Great, thank you. So I feel like I have both good and bad news about high school practices. As was said earlier, I feel like students in our high schools in Minnesota are really adept at using different technologies, different devices, and using them together, understanding how to use apps that can assist in whatever type of learning that they're doing. Across the state, it seems like digital access is getting better. So that's a lot of good news. I think my concern, and I'll jump to the barrier part of the question, is how students are being asked to use that technology and if it's really transforming their learning. The dominant framework for technology learning in schools is still SAMR. I think probably most people are familiar with that, but SAMR is substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition, and the higher you go up on that taxonomy, the more transformational the learning is. And I'm afraid that I think a lot of what students are still being asked to do with their tech tools and any kind of device or any kind of online app still is at that substitution augmentation level. So kids are doing similar types of work that they did in the past, but with some cool tech tools. And so it oftentimes may seem like we're all getting savvier about the tools, which we are in our schools, but maybe it's not changing how we learn and what we learn as much as we would hope that it would do.
Okay. I know it's hard news to hear, but we want all this information, so thanks. Mary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, and we can now see you too.
Great, okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. I agree with Jennifer for a start. What I have been seeing in terms of high school practices, there's a lot of district technology initiatives out there with various devices. What we are seeing nowadays is a lot of use of iPad technology in the elementary schools, with a lot more emphasis on Chromebook, Google-based tools as you get towards the middle school, high school level. So if you're kind of wondering where some of that ability to use different tools and devices comes from, I think that between what kids have access to at home and between that and what they're able to use at school and their own smartphones and so on, they're getting fairly adept at being pretty transparent when it comes to using a different device or tool. So that is probably good news because we're seeing that they are more flexible that way. They're getting very used to also using digital resources. There's a large number of districts now that are really carefully looking at their textbook budgets and purchase of textbooks and moving to more digital resources in their schools, particularly at the high school level. There's a lot of teachers designing and publishing their own digital resources. And we've also had projects like the Minnesota Partnership for Collaborative Curriculum that have resulted in some digital resources being available to classroom teachers for use for their courses. Students are also getting very accustomed to using learning management system type tools, although the prevalent ones in K-12 are probably Schoology and Google Classroom. But again, they're getting familiar through those tools schools with how a learning management system works so that when they do get to a post-secondary education, if they encounter Desire to Learn or Blackboard or any of those systems, it's not a completely alien experience for them. Our students also at the high school level, as some of the presenters alluded to before me, have had more of an exposure to taking classes online or even to experiencing post-secondary classes through online courses or PSEO. And so they get a bit of a, if you will, a head start on what's expected when they go into the post-secondary environment. And in K-12, we do have a digital citizenship education requirement that is tied to some funding that school districts receive for internet access. And so most of the school districts in the state are doing some form of education on aspects of digital literacy and digital citizenship in terms of trying to help students be safe and ethical online and becoming discerning users of information. However, there are some barriers that go along with that, so I will also speak to those. For barriers, while our schools are in relatively really good shape when it comes to broadband access, the same doesn't always hold true when the students go home. So there's still communities out there who don't have access to broadband internet access, or students who are sharing one computer at home between several students in the home. And so access at the home level can still be a little bit problematic in some areas of the state. We are losing our school library media specialists, and those are the people that are the experts in terms of information literacy and helping students learn how to research and be discerning and ethical users of information. And so we find that in a lot of our schools without school library media specialists, students are maybe getting some of that education if they are in another content area that's covering research, but it's not the depth or the same as having a school library media curriculum in the school or support in the school. There's a lack of specific standards around what we teach for some of these topics. So some of the digital literacy pieces do fall into the English language arts academic standards. They're supposed to be embedding information literacy and technology standards within all of the content area standards when they come up for review. But that is very, I think the committees that do review those standards try to do a good job with it, but it's very inconsistent in terms of what is built into the academic standards. There's also a lack of consistency just in terms of our digital citizenship curricula, because every school does that differently, and every school might attack different topics at different grade levels. So if you're not sure, looking statewide, exactly from district to district, it can vary widely in terms of what's covered in that type of coursework. And then the last thing I would say is a barrier is we are seeing in the business that I'm in, which is technology services for school districts, we're seeing a lot of reductions to professional development budgets or ability for teachers to attend professional development when it comes to helping them build effective high school practices to get students ready with technology and information literacy for college. So that's what I would say are the barriers.
Thank you. Wow. I started taking some notes, assuming that we would be maybe using some of these for our discussion in April, but then I asked you to share your in written form, so
no
we'll
problem.
move on. Yeah. Now, Carla, you're next. Thanks, Mary, so much. We may have some time, clearly we'll have some time at the end for questions, and some of you may jump in again. Carla, perhaps you offered some of the practices that you're using to lead to success already. At least I thought I heard it. So in the couple minutes we have left, could you talk about barriers if you haven't already addressed those?
Well, I think the barriers have been with the technology for our high school students, which is why the high schools that we do work with have set aside a technology classroom for those students to use so that they can be successful, so that they do have the access. And again, as far as the learning platform that the students are using, they're using D2L, so we have an online orientation set up to help guide those students through that learning process. And we've been very fortunate to have a proctor, an identified person at each high school that we work with. And, you know, seconding what Mary has said as far as, you know, high schools no longer have libraries and technicians and those people. I mean, sometimes we actually have a superintendent as a proctor in some of these smaller high schools that are overseeing these classrooms where our students are taking their courses in. So I think, you know, we have had barriers. We've tried to address those barriers with some of these ways of helping those students, especially in these rural communities where, you know, even access might be an issue. Students can certainly use their own technology, their iPads or their laptops or their phones or whatever they have, but all of our courses are taught by college faculty in the D2L format, so that's maybe been part of our success. And as far as barriers, you know, really it's just the first-time users of online education, and then just getting those into those orientation classes. So it's not really giving you much on barriers, but just what we found in the past and how we've addressed those in our situation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carla. I will move on to question 4. We're right at that time. We've got about 10 minutes for this if we need it, and we have 2 panelists. You know, I'm Jennifer, this may be the only question that you're addressing, so I might flip the order a bit, Lindsay. Sorry about that, just so we can hear from Jennifer. And I would ask Jennifer this: was there anything else you might want to add to some of the other questions somewhat quickly before going on to how do we prepare first-generation students with regard to technology? So, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm thinking of 2 other barriers that I didn't mention in my response to question 3. One of them is that when my program is working with schools, we use a lot of YouTube videos. And some schools are blocking YouTube or other really pretty helpful online sources, and it depends on the school's acceptable use policy. Is that okay or not? And there's certainly reasons why I can understand that schools want to do that, but on the other hand, there's so much good information out there that students can be accessing. So that's one issue. The second is that our kids are so used to having a device in school now, it is really hard for teachers to get kids to put those devices away when it's not an appropriate time to be using a device. So kids are used to having a cell phone in class and using it and texting during class or sending email during class. And so I think that the kids coming to college are going to expect that they should have those things out all the time, and they may be in for a rude awakening.
Can I interrupt for a minute? I must have the wrong name. I picked these up from the emails. Is your name Julie, not Jennifer?
Julie is my colleague, and I was not able to sign on with my laptop, so we're using my colleague's.
Okay, but you are Jennifer. Okay. And I apologize, you did speak earlier as well. Okay,
That's
great.
okay.
Well, then,
That's okay.
it was a lot to manage today, so I'm trying to juggle all the names. Okay, Lindsay, did you have something to say on question number 4?
Sure. So I think one thing that we can, using the technology that students come with, I think is the best way we can prepare any students versus, and in particular first generation students, is there is so much anxiety around technology and going to college and everything else and learning and what are you going to do and this is a whole new life. especially if students are coming on campus. But using technology that people are familiar with, I think, is one really great way. Whether they've had iPads in the school or whether they just are going to use their own devices. That being thoughtful about the way we design our instruction to make it as device neutral as possible so that we aren't having to switch back and forth, or people that are using a phone have to do one thing and people that have a laptop do another thing, but that it's all universally designed so that no matter how somebody's accessing something, they're getting the same experience. I think just kind of pulling down the barriers. So things like, I think Jennifer mentioned YouTube videos being blocked at certain institutions. There are other platforms where you can put YouTube or where you can put videos up that are probably a little more ethical and less commercial than YouTube, where educators can go and put something up and it's still viewable by students. Not using video for people that have connection issues is also a thing that can be really helpful. And my big thing is I like to prepare people as much as possible to kind of take down those anxiety barriers that happen when it comes to technology and learning. So giving students a bunch of resources in as low barrier a format as possible, whether it's print or it's video or it's audio. And then, and giving it in multiple formats so they can choose whichever one they're the most comfortable with. If they're reading it on a bus on their phone, then that might be a way that they just need to do it. And give them lots of resources and provide orientations to these new technologies if they haven't experienced it. Or just universally provide the orientation to the course management system or to Google Docs or something so that everybody's getting comfortable with it at the same time, because the way somebody may have used Google Classroom or Google Docs or Google Suite or whatever in K-12 in their high school may be very different than the way like the University of Minnesota uses it. So being able to set those expectations as an instructor ahead of time or right at the beginning to say, here's how we're going to do this, can really help build community and really help decrease anxiety in our students.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Is that your phone ringing, Lindsay? Otherwise, I'm asking everyone to mute if you're not speaking. Okay, great. So let me, I'm going to start my video again. And what I think we'll do is we have 15 minutes for question and answer, which is good because this is maybe where we can have a kind of a good conversation if we have time. Before I forget, what I'd like to do is we heard about barriers, but if we're going to have a conversation in meeting 2 about identifying what we're going to call the gap, you know, where are the gaps? So we hear great practices, we hear barriers, and I get that not, as Mary said, the standards aren't being universally maybe adopted or put into the curriculum or being addressed, I guess. But the gap between the two systems, so K-12 and higher ed, where are we finding that for those programs like where we don't have Distance Minnesota working with the students in the high school, having proctors, having all of those supports into place, we have gaps. So I think for meeting 2, we're going to want to talk about that. What else can we do better at? If you hear anything that sounds like a gap, not a barrier, but a gap, if you will, that we should be addressing in meeting 2, please type it into the chat and just say gap, you know, or possible gap, type it into the chat, and then we'll snatch those for next meeting as well. But in the meantime, what I want to do is go back to the questions, and we're going to take them one at a time. And second to scroll to it. Here we go. So for Lindsay, it was question number 1. The question was, which skills are most lacking in college freshmen?
The ones I can only speak to the ones I see, and that's related to basically digital and information literacy, is the biggest thing that's kind of an overarching skill that is, I see it most in college freshmen is knowing how to deal with their information as it's related to technology. So what information is being collected about students, how information is being shared about them, how advertising works, how like social media pulls in stuff and shares it, and targeted ads, and kind of who is watching and listening. So students can have the facility with using their phone, but they may not realize all of the things their phone and their other devices are tracking about them. And that it's been this huge eye-opening moment for students when we talk about it as research and doing all these different things, that there was that critical piece missing about how they work with technology. And it's both information sharing about them and about their stuff and how things connect. So that's what I've seen.
Okay. If anyone else of the panelists have a comment to that, let me know, or feel free to type it into the chat. I'm going to give it. Would anyone else like to address that question? Which skills are most lacking in college freshmen?
This is Kayla. I'll take a swing at that one. I
Go
see
ahead.
a couple of things, and Greg had mentioned in the chat too, about what do we know about this generation of students and the next one. They're the most anxiety-riddled students that we've seen in a long time, and I think we've caused that. There's a really high expectation on grades and never failing, and instead of helping students kind of with resilience, I think we've kind of created this culture of they're almost afraid to fail, and that's what I see with our college freshmen coming in. They are very ultra concerned about every detail and missing a few points, and especially those students who have always historically been at the top of their classes, they really struggle with that. But then I also see those students in the academic middle who are almost afraid to try because these other kids have always been at the top. So that's been a really interesting thing to kind of watch over the last couple of years, and helping students work through, that grit and resilience, and understanding that it's okay if you don't know the answer. That's what we're here for. And so I'm not sure exactly where that's starting or if it's societal, but really have noticed an uptick in the anxiety, and of course then that leads to some other issues that we're seeing with student mental health.
Okay, well, the next question is for you, so stay on the mic.
All right.
It was for me, question number 2. When you say those taking online courses in the high school seem more prepared or successful, how far into the program does that last? Is that right out of the gate when they come in to the program? Is it initial success, or does it go all the way through to the program and to shorter time to graduation? I mean, maybe that's too far of a leap, but I just want to hear what your instincts are.
No, for the community college, which is where I am, it's definitely had an impact on our numbers, because students are coming in with a larger number of credits and they don't need to be here for 2 years. Most of our students now are graduating in 2 semesters or 3 if they're coming in with a significant number of high school credits. So we're seeing that really help propel them further down the road and faster. The flip side of that is a lot of them are graduating from a 4-year college at 20 or 21. That has another set of issues that goes along with that. My oldest daughter was one of those. Being all grown up and going out into the world at 20 is different than at 22. So that has been kind of interesting. I also think as an English faculty, the biggest thing that I've seen is their writing skills. When they are taking online classes in particular and working in discussions and writing papers, just the volume of writing that they are doing is much increased, and that certainly goes over to the other liberal arts classes in particular. Their writing is just leaps and bounds ahead of their peers.
Well, this leads me into the next question in the chat. You may have answered some of it already. What do you see, and this is for you, Kayla, from Alyssa. What do you see anecdotally in terms of better preparation for on-campus courses? Is it about using the digital tools to support on-campus courses? Or do you also see differences in terms of time management, information literacy, etc.?
I would say all of the above. Our students come in with an expectation that they're going to be using D2L for their classes, and so if they're taking an on-campus class and the faculty isn't using D2L for much, those students will push back and let the faculty know that they really want to see more of that, especially if they've had an online class in high school. We see students wanting to use, now it's tutor.com, but Smart Thinking. They're really reliant on that anytime, anywhere help It's very important to them, and they have an expectation that that will be there. Information literacy, that one's interesting, and Julie, was it not Julie? One of the other presenters talked about that, you know. Yeah, okay. That students aren't really sure how to sift through everything, so I think that's an important component for our college faculty, is to continue to help students to think on their own, not tell them what to think, but how to think. We can't make assumptions that they're able to sort through just that overload of information that they get. So that's something that we're still working on pretty extensively, is the digital literacy and information literacy.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to keep on with the questions, make sure we get them answered, and then we'll go back and see if we have 2 or 3 more minutes, if anyone else wants to jump in. This was for question 2 for Carla, was the presenter. Are you willing to share your online orientation course? We'd like to prepare our students for these expectations, and that was from Paul Beckerman, and I don't know what system Paul is with. Paul, if you're here, can you type that into the chat?
Absolutely, this is Carla. Yes, we'd be more than happy to share that with us. We have one for our online college and the high school students in the D2L shell, and then we have another one for our regular online students. But yep, I would be more than happy.
And how do you share it? Does it? I mean, if it's in D2L, obviously people would have to access that, so people outside of our system can't. But is it a standalone course and how do you share it?
Well, our students, all of our courses are offered in D2L, so they have to actually complete an application, and they have a STAR ID, and they go through the whole process of a regular college course. So,
yeah, I don't mean for students. If we were to share this across systems to MDE, for example, or someone in a K-12 system, how would that be shared?
That's a good question.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Plus, we're not supposed to have other people in D2L.
No.
There's a license. So, well, we'll tell you what. Let you and I take that offline. We'll talk about it at some point. So the question is I don't know if the content or curriculum of it can be shared outside of a learning management system. So think about that, and we'll get back together, okay?
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. Let me scroll back up. Give me a second. Okay. Well, okay, Carla answered this. It was a question, have you seen any of the digital learning practices that seem to be effective for your online college and the school students bleed over into the practices at high schools and courses they offer themselves? Carla answered that. We have heard from proctors that the digital learning does bleed over into the practices of the high schools because they have a lab set up with specific times set for the college coursework, which then in the long term supports high school work. So thanks, Carla, for that answer. Greg asks, much of the conversation has focused on the current landscape. What emerging trends within primary and middle schools? Would anyone like to address that?
This is Mary. I'm going to take a stab at it. So emerging trends in primary and middle school, there has been a lot of concern amongst elementary schools and parents about screen time. And Jeff had just shared a really interesting article from Scientific American in the chat that talked about we shouldn't worry about kind of giving us the idea that we probably don't need to worry about screen time as much as we do. However, for younger kids, there is research that does show that the way that the brain is wired and the synapses that young kids are building can be impacted somewhat by technology, which is probably why we see students, you know, if you're my generation or older, you probably see a difference in how you interact with technology as opposed to how you might see somebody the generation behind you uses it, or or how they depend on it. So screen time itself is oftentimes not necessarily the amount that is the problem, it's the how they're using it and what they're doing when they're on it. So, so the trends that I'm seeing now with elementary kids is making sure that activities for learning using technology are very purposeful and not just relying on apps or games for learning. For middle school, I would say that we're seeing a big growth in both elementary and middle school also to get kids interested in STEM disciplines, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And I just participated in a webinar the other day talking about trying to get kids interested in those things at a much younger age. Because once they hit middle school, if they haven't been latched into those types of topics and developed an interest, they are not as likely to go into those in middle school and high school. So we're seeing a big interest in coding and computer science at both the elementary and middle school level, teaching kids coding. And you've seen, probably a lot of you have maybe seen some of the robotics programs that exist now in middle schools and high schools as well. So that was kind of a long answer to a short question, but that's just to give you a snapshot of what I'm seeing out there when I work with schools.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm looking at the time now, and a second. Here we go again. I think it says 3:59 on the computer, so I'm going to forgo the rest of the questions. I think, Katie, are you able to capture all of the chat comments? Otherwise, I can. Just type in and let me know what you want to do about that. And we'll continue. You'll grab it? Okay, great. So this would bring us to the end, and I want to make sure, first of all, I want to thank those people who helped find the panelists, which include Bob Rubini, Jeff Plowman, and actually myself. So not thanking me, but I'm thanking the other two. And thank you to the 5 panelists. And then finally, thank you to everyone who showed up today for the conversation. We appreciate your attendance, and we'll keep the conversation going in part 2. So that's it for this portion.
Can I just jump in real quick? I think people may be leaving the call, and that's great, but I just wonder, like I threw into the chat this question about this is something that's going to continue into next month, and I'm just wondering if there are some voices missing, in particular, like those around teacher prep. Like, if anybody knows anyone who's in teacher prep in your system, I would really appreciate having that voice here. So maybe you can contact Leslie, Bob, or myself if you've got thoughts on that, and any others that we might be forgetting about too.